Hey everyone, Rua here. I've been putting off Beastmaster's guide for months and months before finally conceding that I just need to make it, and come what may when Square Enix patches the job again, potentially follow up with a second part. If you've been watching some of my other videos on this channel, and on other channels such as Logical's Next Games and listening to a Silly's New Dawn podcast, you'll know that I've brought Beastmaster up before and argued its case. Well, here I'm going to lay out all I know about the job, how it functions and where it currently fits into the game's meta. This is going to be an exceptionally long job guide, over an hour's running time. I've therefore included timestamps for ease of access if you need to refer back to a specific section. Okay, let's go. Beastmaster has come a very long way from the pre-Adolin era. If you're a returning player from that time, then the job you see me going into here might look completely unrecognizable. Beastmaster currently fits the role of a DPS with some hefty support utility built into it in the form of its familiar pets. The job uses axes as its main weapon, having the highest native skill in the class and all possible weapon skills, some of which it's uniquely suited to take full advantage of. While the job lacks any native magic ability, the utility its pets provide to itself and to the Beastmaster's group are quite exceptional. For a job that for the longest time was considered for solo play only, Beastmaster has adapted to the times and is now something else, something greater. A Beastmaster's strengths begin with its mastery of ecosystems, of exploiting killer effects far better than any other job. If a Beastmaster can use these systems to its advantage, then it will reach DPS numbers close to that of a heavy DPS. Beastmasters are also well suited to make use of other circle effects from paladins, samurai, dragoons and dark knights. If paired with those jobs, the synergy is excellent. Those 4 jobs cover their own respective monster families, but only one each. A Beastmaster covers 7, and with its Killer Instinct ability, it pushes a group's DPS further. On a similar note, the debuff effects of certain high-level pets are very strong, and will have a noticeable impact on damage output in endgame content for an entire group. The sheer power of these pet debuffs also opens up other options for support jobs, who could potentially rework their typical buff loadout if a veteran Beastmaster is present. Beastmaster's pets can also give them extremely strong attack and defense buffs, along with other effects I'll go into later, so the job reaches PDIF cap ridiculously easily. If reaching the physical damage limit is for some reason not possible, or if the target in question is weaker to magic damage, then the job has options there too, 2 elemental weapon skills for extra damage variety. Thanks to relatively recent updates, Beastmaster can now achieve a 70% subtle blow value, coming very close to a monk with its Tandem blow trait. The fact that the job has pets which innately have the subtle blow trait, and some which even have the ability to sap or outright wipe enemy TP, means the job is surprisingly effective at controlling a battle. Beastmaster is one of the only 2 DPS jobs, the other being Dragoon, capable of clearing its accrued enmity. Dragoon has Super Jump, a Beastmaster has Snarl, which instantly passes all of its built up enmity to its pet. You'd be very surprised how useful this ability is. In long drawn out battles it will really show its worth. Finally, the job is very much approachable for a new or returning player looking for a job with a high entry floor. Beastmaster was famous for its ease of access for new players back at the 75 cap era, and to a certain extent it still is now. The job's own identity has shifted, but this adage has stood the test of time. Into the cons. Beastmaster covers 7 monster families by itself. It can use the circle effects of 4 other jobs, but if they cannot use any of those 11, then their damage output will fall. Not to an extreme degree, but it will be noticeable. Beastmaster pets function well as support for the Beastmaster, and as debuff DPS support for its group, but the pets themselves are frankly poor DPS in their own right. It's odd seeing pets clearly designed for DPS, but who fall so drastically short of the standard it's pointless even trying. I'm not going to cover said pets in this guide for this exact reason. It's just not a good use of your job space in a group. Pets generally have a lot of HP and can take some hefty hits on a case-by-case basis, but getting hit with certain status ailments can stop them in their tracks. Reward can remove a plethora of ailments in one shot, but it cannot be used repeatedly and will not remove any ailment which either stops a pet moving like petrification, or that leaves them wide open for a major follow-up attack, like defense and magic defense down. Another issue concerning pets is that it can be really difficult to change pets frequently due to the reuse timers of the abilities used to summon them. Beastmaster is about adapting to the situation at hand, so changing pets happens a lot more than you might think. The days of using charm pets in the wild, which although it was made possible in Odyssey, is impractical to the point of it being reduced to a gimmick. Familiar pets are the main tool of the job now, but it still feels as though Beastmaster has lost a fair bit of its identity. There are abilities in its kit you'll likely never use, and that just feels off. Beastmaster shares a common problem with Warrior in that it cannot optimize offensive build despite getting a substantial bonus through job points. This is because it's impossible to cap attack speed without a dancer's haste samba. Like with Charm before, not being able to properly use an aspect of the job just feels off-putting. Axes have some powerful weapon skills, but none of its strongest physical options have level 3 skill chain properties. Some have level 2 which can close a level 3, but not having a strong physical weapon skill akin to Tool Cleaver or Tachi Fudo is noticeable. This is admittedly a minor issue given the meta of everyone going medieval on everything they meet, but it's still worth mentioning. Finally, the prospect of bringing a Beastmaster to group content is still a hard sell to the majority of the community unaware of what the job currently is and what it's capable of. This guide has been hard to put together at times for this exact reason, and I hope if anything comes of it, it will help shed light on it and inform the community about a job which still flies under the radar. Merits on Beastmaster is a tale of two halves. Group 1 is clear cut, it's going all in on Cool Beast and Ready Recast. Those two abilities are crucial to the job, so getting their reuse timers down is important. You could make a solid case for Reward Recast over Cool Beast, but I often find myself changing pets, so this is why I went with what I did. Group 2 has one category set in stone. You are maxing out Killer Instinct. No ifs or buts about it. Do it. What you do with the rest of Group 2 is entirely your call, but I would put at least one merit into Beast Affinity. Mine is maxed out and you'll see why later on. Feral Howl is a decent call, as is Beast Healer. You'll come to your own conclusion the more you experience the job, I guess. Before getting into any rundowns of abilities, we need to go over some mechanics which exist beyond Beastmaster but fundamentally affect it. Most monsters in Vana'diel are subject to correlations in the ecosystem. There are two, opposition and predation. Beastmasters need to heed attention to the latter. Predation basically means that a monster family is strong against one family but weak against another. The two charts you're seeing now break it down nicely. Vermin are strong against plantoids, plantoids are strong against beasts, beasts are strong against lizards, and lizards are strong against vermin. So, beasts will gain an intimidation effect, a damage dealt bonus and a damage taken reduction against lizards, but will suffer the same as penalties when fighting plantoids. If a beast was to fight vermin on the other hand, then neither side would experience bonuses or penalty. It would be an even match. Every pet a Beastmaster can summon will have a job trait which gives it these effects, while Beastmasters themselves have all 7 possible traits as part of their own job traits. I said 7 traits because there are actually 2 separate predation ecosystems. The one I just mentioned and another covering birds, aquans and amorphs. It's absolutely essential that a Beastmaster knows how these 2 ecosystems function, as being able to exploit monster weaknesses is a major strong point of the job's damage potential. Actually, it's not just the Beastmaster this concerns, it concerns their entire group. Killer Instinct will give the killer effect of the Beastmaster's pet to everyone in range, giving players these same bonuses. The ecosystems are all the more important to understand in content where you'll be facing a variety of monster families. Odyssey immediately springs to mind, so knowing how to adapt if needs must will serve you well. There are currently 2 pieces of equipment which interact with this mechanic. One is Beastmaster exclusive and the other is not. I'll go into both later. Let's address the elephant in the room. Remarkable as it may well sound for players who remember the days of Beastmasters using Charm to use wild monsters as pets, those days are long gone. Let me explain why. Sure, you can charm a high level monster and then use Familiar to ensure a lengthy duration of the charm effect, but what really kills using a wild pet is that you cannot order said pet to use a specific skill with the sit command, and you cannot do so freely. The pet will need at least 1000% TP, and even then it will use a random skill from its list. This is in contrast to the pets a Beastmaster can summon whose skills can be selected and are not subject to this TP requirement. Perhaps this will be addressed in some way in future, but as it stands, using a charmed pet is just not an effective use of Beastmaster skills. Did you ever think you would hear that? Familiar pets, or jug pets as they're otherwise known, are the pets a Beastmaster should be using. These pets are summoned by having a chosen jug in the ammo slot and using the Call Beast ability, which expends the jug and calls the pet to your side. Jug pets spawn at set levels depending on what they are, but they all have a hard cap of level 119, the same eye level as the Beastmaster. The vast majority of jug pets a Beastmaster should use come at level 119 by default, especially when using high quality jugs crafted or purchased from the auction house, but some will need help getting their level higher. This is where Beast Affinity comes into play. Bestial Loyalty does the exact same thing as Call Beast, but with one small exception. It does not consume the jug used to summon the pet in question, so it's usually used for summoning pets from a high quality and more expensive jug, so the Beastmaster is not throwing away gil every time they summon an important pet. Bestial Loyalty does have a substantially longer reuse timer though, quadruple that of Call Beast at 20 minutes. Let's go over pet commands and how pets in general function. You'll notice that there's a pretty hefty list of commands for a pet, so we best make sense of them. Fight sets your pet on a chosen target. The pet will stay on that target until it's made to change target in one of two ways. Either the Beastmaster designates a new target, or the pet is attacked by another monster, which will cause it to turn on its second attacker and instead go for that. If there are multiple targets, you will therefore need to set it back on the one you want. This doesn't happen often if a tank is holding enmity, but it's important to know it can happen. While a pet is engaged, you can choose a special attack for it to perform from the ready command. These attacks operate on a charge-based system akin to a Scholar stratagems, and the Beastmaster must be very close to their pet for an attack order to be issued. Each attack has a required number of charges to activate. You can store a maximum of 3 charges and they regenerate at a base rate of 30 seconds per charge. This can be substantially reduced through ready merits and the Gletti's breaches, which halve the recharge rate to 15 seconds. Something to beware of is that if the pet is attacking multiple targets because it is being attacked by multiple targets, then any ready attack will be used on what it is currently fighting, not necessarily on what you want it to be used on. Stay makes your pet, well, stay. The pet will stay exactly where it is and will not follow you as it normally would. Why would you do this though? Well, stay acts like the heal function for players, so your pet will recover HP a lot faster than usual if made to stay. It can also be used to keep a pet out of harm's way while the Beastmaster fights. Heal causes the pet to return to the Beastmaster's side, either disengaging from whatever it is fighting or overriding the stay command. Finally, the leave command dismisses your pet, causing it to despawn so you can summon a different one. Be mindful of your Call Beast and Bestial Loyalty timers before dismissing a pet. That's even caught me out more than once. Familiar is a Beastmaster's first SP, and frankly it's nothing special. Familiar gives a 10% HP boost to the current pet and ensures a 30-minute duration on a charm pet regardless of its level. But since we're not using charm pets, moving on. Familiar needs relic enhancement and job points to do anything noticeable, with the first giving the pet a 10% job ability haste and the second giving it plus 60 to all attributes. Familiar will have a minor impact on the damage output of your pet, but overall it's nothing too special. If you have a pet you're committed to using for a given situation, then you might as well use it. Two abilities that do have a significant impact on a pet's damage output and its survival are Spur and Run Wild. Spur gives the pet a store TP effect, plus 20 store TP is a baseline, but this can be increased significantly with JSC equipment, up to plus 75 store TP. With job points invested, Spur also gives a plus 60 attack bonus to the pet. Spur has no penalty to its use, so feel free to use it. Run Wild, on the other hand, does come with a penalty, but it's still well worth using. Run Wild increases every stat the pet has, accuracy, attack, defense, evasion, the works, by 25%, but will dismiss the pet after 5 minutes and 40 seconds have passed. Generally speaking, pets lack solid magic evasion and defense by themselves, with some notable exceptions, so Run Wild doubles as a DPS and mitigation buff. Timing Run Wild is important, as you don't want to use it on an expensive pet you called with bestial loyalty, when its timer will not be ready in time for it to be resummoned without expending the jug. Reward is the primary means a Beastmaster heals their pet, using a pet biscuit to restore HP, give a minor regen effect, and remove status ailments. Functioning a lot like a cure spell, Reward uses the Beastmaster's Mind stat, Reward Potency JSC, and the base cure power of the biscuit used to determine the potency of the heal. The biscuit also determines the regen potency, which despite only being 20 HP per tick is still something. Reward has a base reuse timer of 90 seconds, which can be lowered by 36 seconds with 2 pieces of JSC easily worked into the set. When used with the artifact body, which should also be in the set, Reward removes an array of ailments, but won't remove everything, petrification being the most dangerous. Snarl is a very useful ability it pays to have in an easily accessible part of your macro bar. Snarl instantly transfers 99% of the Beastmaster's enmity to its pet, making it an incredible ability in long battles where DPS typically hit the enmity ceiling and then find themselves camped in a mitigation set before inevitably getting wiped out. Beastmaster, like Dragoon, gets around this problem with Snarl. Snarl does put your pet at risk of dying shortly after it's used, but since volatile enmity decays steadily, the danger should pass within a minute. Snarl is also very useful for purposely putting your target on a pet which has the defenses to withstand damage better than yourself. I'll go into 2 particularly good candidates later. Killer Instinct is among the best abilities Beastmaster has. Killer Instinct gives the killer trait of the Beastmaster's summoned pet at time of activation to all party members within range, increasing damage dealt, reducing damage taken, and giving them an intimidation trait. The killer trait does not change if the Beastmaster changes pets after activation, so it's possible, if not often ideal, for a Beastmaster to use a specific pet for Killer Instinct to ensure the bonus takes effect before changing to another pet for even more DPS support. I have to break down the math to really illustrate how powerful this ability is. Killer Instinct by itself gives a 15% damage dealt bonus. That's a straight up damage increase to all attacks and all hits of every weapon skill. The bonus is reduced to 10% against targets that register impossible to gauge, but a 10% bonus is still substantial. Here's where it gets really powerful though. The damage bonus is calculated after all other calculations have taken place. That means Killer Instinct will take the buffs and equipment of heavy DPS and push them even further. This is the equivalent of taking the rank 15 augment weapon skill damage bonus of an REMA weapon and applying it to every single attack and every single hit of every weapon skill. Despite what an incredible ability it is, Killer Instinct does have one minor drawback. It cannot be kept up full time, and if you're in content where you're facing multiple monster families, then you cannot easily change the killer trait you're giving. Getting accustomed to what family is weak against what other family so you can best use Killer Instinct will take time. I've thrown together this little chart you can refer to. Visual aids might be better than just words. Remember, Killer Instinct only gives the killer trait in one direction, so you're not going to be faced with a penalty if you get it wrong, but you're not going to get a bonus either. If you're still having trouble remembering the ecosystems, even I do at times, so don't worry about it. Having an echo macro like this somewhere on your Beastmaster's macro book will be a lifesaver. I do recommend keeping a macro like this in echo form. The last thing you want to do is let on to your group that you're not sure what you're doing after all. Unleash is the Beastmaster's second SP, and for what it does, it's very powerful. Unleash sets the TP of your pet to 3000%, keeps it at 3000% for the 1 minute duration, and gives ready no reuse timer, essentially making it akin to Astral Conduit for a Beastmaster. With job points invested, Unleash will also increase special attack damage by 40%, which when stacked on top of the 20% damage bonus from the ready job point category, suddenly turns pets into very dangerous DPS, even if it is just for a minute. If the pet you have at time of activation does not have spammable attacks, Unleash can still be used for enhancing or enfeebling attacks. Those which vary duration with TP will still see a major benefit. Unleash also has another effect which is not mentioned in the ability Summation. It resets the reuse timer of Cool Beast, and gives Cool Beast no reuse timer for the 1 minute duration of Unleash. This means that Unleash is brilliant for calling a new pet in an emergency, if neither of your timers are ready, or if you simply need to change pets rapidly to get various enhancing effects on yourself, or debuff effects on your target, all of which will have max duration due to the TP capping effect of Unleash. Overall, Unleash is an amazing ability. It can be put to a myriad of uses. Use it wisely. With base abilities out of the way, it's time to go into the pets themselves. The best way to go about this is to break down the commonly used pets into 3 categories, the first of which will be the most common for group play, debuffing pets. These are the ones used when support is plentiful and a Beastmaster is filling its best role of a utility DPS. Fluffy Bredo is an odd pet. It takes reduced physical damage, especially from blunt attacks which barely dent it, and resists most magic elements. But it's especially vulnerable to fire attacks which kill it very quickly if unmitigated. Bredo is by far the strongest magic DPS pet a Beastmaster has, and comes with only 2 special attacks, Foul Waters and Pestilent Plume. Pestilent Plume is the real showstopper with Bredo, hitting surprisingly hard even without a dedicated set, and inflicting Plague, Blind and Magic Defense down in a conal area of effect. The Magic Defense down effect is very strong at -25, which although weaker than Geomalaise, it surpasses it easily in content where Geomancy is weakened, and even then it stacks with Malaise to really hammer a target's magic defense. Fluffy Bredo is an excellent addition to magic based setups, and even sees some niche use in battles where TP suppression is important, thanks to the plague effect of Pestilent Plume. It also doesn't help that he's got a really funny name, it's just something about the word fluffy. Swooping Zhivago has a slight weakness to piercing attacks for being a bird, but takes half damage from slashing attacks as well as half damage from wind and fire attacks, something which earned him the moniker of the Aegis bird. Zhivago is the true middle of the road DPS support pet because it's just a general great all-rounder. Molting Plumage is a very accurate conal dispel. Swooping Frenzy is likewise a very accurate defense and magic defense down, the only ability in the game to inflict those 2 ailments at once. And Pentapek is the only attack in the game which inflicts amnesia. It also doesn't hurt that Zhivago is Skillchain glue, having fusion on Swooping Frenzy, excellent for setting up powerful light skill chains thanks to the debuffs it also inflicts, and both distortion and light on Pentapek. Swooping Frenzy is Zhivago's best attack. The -25% defense and -25 magic defense is very potent. Its 2 charge requirement is manageable, so it can be used fairly often if going between targets. It's also absolutely lethal when paired with DPS using hybrid weapon skills. The only thing that lets Zhivago down is that Pentapek's amnesia is not too reliable, even with a high-end set, not lasting too long on high-level targets. I've gotten some use out of it, but not enough to justify the ready charges. Still, you can't really go wrong with Zhivago. Generous Arthur is easily the best known Beastmaster pet, and for good reason. He's an absolute nightmare for anything he comes across. Arthur is fairly tanky, having a native +40 magic defense bonus, having very high native physical defense, and taking reduced damage from slashing and blunt attacks. Arthur's real draw though are his 2 special attacks. Corrosive Ooze inflicts a heavy 33% attack and defense down, which cannot miss the target or be resisted. It will always land, no matter what it's used on. This means the higher the level and the stronger the target, the better Arthur will perform, absolutely murdering the attack and defenses of everything around him. DPS will definitely notice the effect of Corrosive Ooze, especially in content where Geo Frailty is heavily weakened. Arthur's second attack is Purulent Ooze. This is arguably the strongest attack in the entire game across any job. Seriously. Purulent Ooze inflicts a weak bio, but it's the only attack in the game which also inflicts max HP down. The effect is -10 of maximum HP. That might sound inconsequential, but let me break it down for a moment. Disjoint bosses on Wave 3 Dynamis Divergence have 20 million HP, and Purulent Ooze can land on them. Even after the effect wears off, they have still lost that HP, so Arthur just inflicted 2 million damage in a single hit. This is a one-off trick since Purulent Ooze goes off of maximum HP and not current HP, but it's still a really good trick. Purulent Ooze does not have a guaranteed land mechanic like Corrosive Ooze, but it's still fairly accurate, and with a high-end set it's easy to land, practically guaranteed with Water Threnody or Frazzle 3. Unfortunately, you will not be able to tell when Purulent Ooze lands, but you'll notice it when a battle takes less time to win for some reason. Arthur is an excellent pet to keep around. He's often my default if all other bases are covered. Be sure to keep a stack of his jug to hand. Energized Sefina is among the more basic of the debuffing pets, but she is easily among the hardest hitting of the bunch as well. Sefina has some decent variety. High frequency field is a conal evasion down of -40, nowhere near as strong as a red mage's distract 3, but it's yet another conal attack, so it's arguably better in content where there's a lot of targets like in Dynamis, as it will hit more in one shot and save the red mage some time. Spoilers are 20% strength down on a single target, nothing too special, but it's there. Finally, Sefina has her own 25% defense down in the form of Rhino Wrecker, another conal defense down like Zhivago. You might notice conal attacks becoming a recurring theme here. Rhino Wrecker hits surprisingly hard even without substantial support, especially after its first use since the defense down will power up any follow-up uses. Rhino Wrecker also has the fusion property, so it's great for setting up skill chains. It's also the strongest piercing attack Beastmaster has, so if you use it against something weak to piercing, say birds, it's gonna really wreck them. Daring Roland is a great pet. Old school Beastmasters might remember Faithful Falcor fondly from way back when, and Roland is like his better older brother. Roland has a lot of tricks he can pull out. He has several tiers of the Store TP trait, Triple Attack, even Treasure Hunter. Roland gains TP very fast, and can hit very hard against undead with his Hoof Volley. Choke Breath is a potent conal paralysis and silence. Nihility's Song brings an AoE dispel with a massive range, but Roland's showstopper is Jedatura. Jedatura is familiar to tank subbing Blue Mage for its enmity generation, but Roland actually lands the Terror effect, lands it often for lengthy spells and against targets you think he shouldn't be able to. Jedatura is extremely accurate with a dedicated set and freezes anything in a conal area of effect dead. Its only real drawbacks are the 3 charges needed to perform, meaning that outside of Unleash or constant ability resets from a Corsair, it can't be used consecutively, and that the targets need to be facing Roland for it to work since it's a gaze attack. There will be some inevitable adjustment of positioning to get Roland behind the tank, and if hate is loose and the target is spinning like a bottle cap, landing Jedatura will be hard. The Beastmaster might well lose out on DPS while getting Roland into position to freeze targets, but most of the time that's worth it. Finally, Roland is also Beastmaster's best DPS pet to use against undead, because Hoof Volley deals blunt damage, hits hard and has great skill chain properties, fragmentation and light, making it very skill chain friendly with axe weapon skills. Roland's only got one problem that needs addressing, Phantoad. Phantoad should act like a monk's boost currently does, but it doesn't for some reason. It quadruples the damage of the next physical attack, already special attack, but since Roland attacks so fast it will often waste the charge before it can be healed and stopped from doing so. I'm not sure if Roland is meant to stop attacking when Phantoad is active, but if he is, it's not working as it should. With some skill you can use Phantoad as it's meant to be used, and I have seen some crazy damage from it when pulled off, but it's very difficult to do as it stands. It could use a patch. This is the set I use for landing pet debuffs. Granted, some of it is high end and will take a while to get, but generally speaking, it shouldn't be out of reach for a relatively experienced player. The good news is, your strongest debuff for heavy DPS, Corrosive Ooze, does not need any magic accuracy to land, so if needs must, it can serve as a springboard to get this set if you're a completely new player. The Gletty set from Tier 3 Odyssey is excellent, as it alone is 250 magic accuracy. That and the 2 axes will pretty much cover magic accuracy concerns for most endgame content. I did this for Dancer to underline how strong its step debuffs are in wider group context, so I'll do the same for Beastmaster here. Beastmaster pet debuffs not being subject to potency penalties is very noticeable in the increasing number of endgame events where debuff geomancy is being hit with the same. Admittedly, this is much easier to consider and incorporate in alliance content, but the math and scenarios you're seeing here can still apply to 6-man groups. Odyssey, Shoal and Nems have been a real testing ground for me in this regard, so rest assured these scenarios have been battle tested. Feel free to pause this section and come back to it for reference. Next we're going over the buffing pets. These are the pets you generally use before fights to get buffs on yourself if support is lacking, though taking them into fights is not a bad idea provided debuff support is covered. Some of the abilities these pets have affect both themselves and the Beastmaster, and some of them are exceptionally powerful. Some of them have very unique effects, which will make you wonder why Beastmaster does not have an equivalent of Blue Mage's diffusion. Perhaps it might someday. Anyhow, I digress. Let's start with Jovial Edwin. Jovial Edwin is a paladin in crab form, having very high native defense and 2 killer traits, Amorph and Undead Killer. Edwin's moveset is excellent. Bubble Curtain gives himself and his Beastmaster a shell effect almost double in power to that of a White Mage's Shower of 5. Scissor Guard doubles the defense of Edwin and the Beastmaster, and Metallic Body gives a 200 HP Stone Skin which can be easily spammed. Edwin comes with another defense down, this one being AoE rather than conal. Venom Shower is minus 25% defense. Weaker than Arthur's, but given Edwin's defensive buffs, it could well be a decent trade. Finally, Mega Scissors is a fairly standard physical attack which has the gravitation property. Nothing too special, but it does cover another key base on the skill chain chart. Edwin is best used in situations where you're facing massive physical damage, where Scissor Guard protects himself and the Beastmaster, and where he can be relied on to take damage in the Beastmaster's place by dropping enmity onto him via Snarl. What would make Edwin even better is if he had means of generating enmity by himself rather than rely on Snarl alone. If he's meant to be a paladin, he could use some enmity tools. Going to the other side of this coin, we have rhyming Shizuna. Shizuna isn't a pet you generally take into a fight, it's one you use at the start of a fight to get the Rage Berserk effect before swapping out for another pet. Since Beastmaster is unable to access Berserk from a warrior sub-job, being tied to Ninja's sub, getting Berserk from their pet is brilliant. However, and this really needs emphasizing, be very careful when you have this Berserk effect active. It is far stronger than a warrior's version, and that goes both ways. It's a 50% attack bonus and a 50% defense penalty. Those are not small numbers. Rage will get a Beastmaster close to the PDIF cap by itself, other support depending of course. But more importantly, it makes room for a potential shake-up in Corsair support, swapping Chaos Roll for Fighter's Roll, the latter of which is a major buff to the job's damage output by giving it native multi-attack. So how can you utilize this potent attack buff and not instantly die? Well, there's two ways. The first is to remember that Rage has a lengthy duration, capping at 9 minutes, and Shizuna can be swapped out once it's up. Arthur's Corrosive Ooze will cripple target defenses, thus pushing the Rage even further, but it will also cripple target attack power, almost negating the defense penalty of Rage by hitting the opponent's attack stat. Edwin's Scissor Guard will also stack with Rage to completely negate the penalty and even give you a surplus 50% defense bonus, so he is also an option to swap to. If your group has a tank and you're not taking direct damage while Rage is active, you're still not safe. Any reasonably strong AoE physical attack is likely going to deck you in a single hit without mitigation of some kind. Don't get caught out. The second way is to make sure that your TP build has ample mitigation in it so you don't hit the floor in seconds with Rage active. The Gletty set from Odyssey Tier 3 is excellent, having physical damage taken reduction on every piece, very high base attack and physical damage limit to make sure your attacks are going to hurt. Rage is a percentage based attack bonus, so the higher your base attack stat is, the further it's going to go. Clearing the guy on the lowest difficulty is all that's needed to get the Gletty set, so it remains the best go-to option for a new player. Another set which works is the Malignant set, which trades base attack and a slightly lower PDL value for store TP. Malignance is a lot harder, or rather more time intensive to get than the Gletty set, but it undoubtedly would be better with the Aimer, Mythic Axe and Bard Minuets. Regardless of which one you go for, make sure you indeed have one TP set like this spec'd to prevent your untimely demise. Vivacious Gaston is a lynx and falls under 3 categories of pet at the same time: debuffing, buffing and AoE cleaving. Gaston has a Gaze Silence with Chaotic Eye, a very potent Paralysis with Blaster, an AoE Thunder Nuke with Charge Whisker, and a unique buff called Frenzied Rage. Frenzied Rage gives a 20% attack bonus with no penalty to defense. Here's the thing though, it stacks with Shizuna's Rage, so a Beastmaster can give themselves a 70% attack bonus for 9 minutes before both need reapplying. That's stronger than a Rostam Corsair's Chaos Roll with the Dark Knight bonus at 65%, and stronger than an Idris Geomancer's Indie Fury at 61%. Gaston gets good use out of Blaster especially. Chaotic Eye is a Gaze Conal like Jettatora, so it can be tricky to land, whereas Blaster can be used from anywhere and still connect. Whether the Beastmaster wants to take Gaston into a battle beyond getting his attack bonus is entirely their call. He has other debuffs to warrant it, but does not have a defense down to speed up a battle. Where Gaston does shine though is when fighting multiple targets. Charge Whisker scales damage with TP, and at a high charge it'll hit pretty hard even without Geo Malaise, being something akin to a Blue Mage cleaving spell under Burst Affinity. Gaston has another potential application, one which doesn't immediately spring to mind. Although I think Fluffy Bredo was still the superior magic DPS pet, part of the reason Bredo holds that status for me is because he comes with a magic defense down effect of his own, which amps up his damage as well as that of the group. However, if you have a Geomancer present, then there is every chance that bursting Gaston's Charge Whisker will far outclass Bredo. I've honestly not had a chance to test it whatsoever. I'll have to report back at some point, but the fact that Gaston can do some decent burst damage with Charge Whisker even without Geo Malaise shows some promise. Vivacious Vickie, not a relation to Gaston, is a very unique pet. Being a Raz, Vickie is a monk, so she has a lot of HP, solid defenses, 35% subtle blow and a 22% base counter rate. Vickie only has 2 special attacks, but they're good. Sweeping Gouge is yet another defense down of 25% and has the Induration property, making it excellent for setting up fragmentation and subsequent light skill change that hurt. Vickie's standout feature is Zealous Snort. If you've ever fought a Raz NM, then you know how dangerous this move is. Zealous Snort gives a 25% haste, a plus 25 magic defense bonus, a 25% counter rate bonus, and a 25% guard rate bonus, for a maximum duration of 3 minutes before it needs to be reapplied. This enhances Vickie's already solid base attributes, turning her into the perfect pet to drop enmity onto via Snarl. Here's the great bit though, Zealous Snort also affects the Beastmaster. So with a specialized TP set, a Beastmaster can reach a counter rate of 67% in a set which also puts it to 70% subtle blow, effectively turning it into a monk using axes. Watching even high level monsters be met with counter after counter is really something. To match this, a monk usually needs to use counter stance or to go into a set spec for counter, often at the cost of DPS attributes. Beastmaster largely avoids this. If in a future update pet enhancing moves can be copied to party members, then Zealous Snort will be a shoo-in for the one to go for. Monks will be all over those effects for their job. Overall, Vickie is an incredible pet to use if all of the bases are covered and you're looking for survivability and damage. She feeds very little TP, takes little damage from physical or magic, counters often, and comes with a defense down for group DPS support. This is the counter build I use. It puts me at 60%, 67% when I complete the Gletti's Mask to rank 20. You can take the counter rate even higher, to 71% and potentially all the way to the 80% cap, but as it is, it serves me well. The Malignance pieces are there because it's important to remember that monster special attacks cannot be countered. You will still need some mitigation in the set. If you're confident though, you can use other pieces in the build and go for more DPS. Moving into the final category of pets, we come to the crowd killers. These three are designed for exactly that, wiping out crowds of monsters. We've already covered Vivacious Gaston, so for time's sake we won't need to go back to him. Bouncing Bertha should be a familiar sight for veteran players, even if they have never played Beastmaster themselves. This is because Bouncing Bertha once saw great popularity as the go-to crowd killer, and for a time, specifically before blue mages got better gear to burn down crowds better, this truly was the best AoE killer in the game. Don't get me wrong, Bouncing Bertha is still decent. Tegmina Buffet hits very hard at higher TP, and under Unleash it carves through crowds like butter. What lets Bertha down is Tegmina doesn't have a very big radius, 6 yards at best. It scales damage with TP, but sadly it doesn't scale radius. Bertha is also not very durable. She can deal damage but can't take sustained damage from the crowd in return, so if you don't have a tank holding the monsters, she's not going to last very long. For the times you need the pet to be the tank while cleaving everything down, look no further than Sultry Patrice. Patrice is absurdly tanky, taking half damage from slashing and piercing attacks and only quarter damage from blunt attacks. Patrice has two main special attacks to make it an excellent crowd killer. Fluid Spread should be familiar to any Odyssey group who avoid clots out of fear of this exact attack. Fluid Spread hits hard at high TP, which Patrice will have no trouble getting to. It has a wider radius than Bertha's Tegmina Buffet. Patrice is unique in that he's one of the few pets capable of healing himself through draining target HP. Digest only needs one ready charge, so if he ends up in trouble somehow, Patrice can keep himself going between reward uses. At times, Patrice really feels like a cheat code. He could be sent into the middle of a crowd, use Fluid Spread to get attention, and then spin like a gun turret, attacking everything around him, charging up for the next AoE attack, which will hit even harder. Under Unleash or with Geo Frailty active, Patrice gets ungodly nasty. Precious little is surviving the barrage of AoE attacks that follow. Patrice's only downside is that he has no real defense against magic attacks, so be very careful if whatever you're fighting can nuke him, because if they do, he might get fried. The last pet to go over is actually an honorary mention. He's one that's come back into prominence very recently. Fatso Fargann is a leech. He's small, but he has a very good niche use. Fargann has 4 special attacks. 2 are unremarkable, 1 has situational use, and the last is incredible. Acid Mist is the strongest AoE attack down Beastmaster has at -50%. That's even stronger than Arthur's Corrosive Ooze, but does not hit defense like Arthur. TP Drain Kiss is Fargann's best move. It does exactly what it implies. It drains the target's TP. It will never miss no matter the level of the target, but it does require some skill to use properly. TP Drain Kiss needs 3 ready charges to use, so it cannot be spammed outside of Unleash, and the amount it drains depends on the TP Fargann has when he uses it. This isn't too much of an issue since Fargann will keep the TP he takes for the next drain, creating a positive feedback loop of ensuring a full TP drain each time, as you're seldom if ever using his TP for anything else. Under Unleash though, a Beastmaster using Fargann can completely prevent a target from using any TP attacks for a whole minute by constantly draining their TP. A brilliant trick for when an NM drops below 25% HP. Fargann has one major weakness though, his level. Since he is such a low level pet and hasn't gotten an updated version, his maximum level with 5 out of 5 beast affinity is 114. This is why I'm usually 5 out of 5 in the category, to keep Fargann alive. This means you'll need a very good pet DT set to keep Fargann alive in high end content, as chances are the strategy might hinge on keeping him alive. On that note, I provided links to my sets for people to refer to in their own time, but more importantly a link to the Beastmaster forum, which has been maintained and kept up to date very well by an active community of veteran players. I'm not going to show all the sets I use in this guide because, well, frankly it's long enough as it is, and my sets deviate quite a bit from others. Going with the community suggestions for gear sets and then comparing them to mine is going to be better than just going off my own. There's even suggestions for gear progression on the front page of the main thread, very useful if you're a new or returning player. The posters on the Beastmaster guide thread are a good bunch. It's actually one of the most active and receptive forums on the auction house website I've found. If you're stuck on a point about the job, then leave a comment there and it should be addressed promptly. A place new Beastmasters would do well to remember is M&P's Market in Upper Juneau. This store has a merchant who sells several jug pets, among the most notable Shizuna and Arthur, and the biscuits you need for reward. The store is close to where you first unlock the Beastmaster job and is a short stroll away from the home point by the Battaglia Down zone line. You won't find high quality jug pets in this store though, those can only be crafted and sold on the auction house. This is why bestial loyalty is usually reserved for them. Something else you can get from the auction house are door mulsums. If you cast your mind way back to my Puppet Master guide, I've mentioned these before. Mulsums are an emergency instant heal for your pet, restoring between 25 to 50% of its maximum HP. I advise you carry at least 3 to 4 of these, especially in difficult battles where you need to keep a certain pet, say Fargann, alive between reward uses. Earlier in this guide I mentioned that Beastmaster could reach a subtle blow value comparable to a monk, and I should really explain how to do that. Since a Beastmaster is usually sub-ninja for optimal DPS, they already have subtle blow 3, which is 15%. That means they only need 35% from equipment to hit the 50% cap. This can be achieved with only 3 pieces of equipment, the Tenian Dagger, the Bathi Choker, and the Sacro Breastplate. So that takes you to 50%, where are you getting the other 20%? 5% Subtle Blow 2 comes from the Sherida Earring, and the remaining 15% comes from the Tandem Blow job trait, which gives 15% Subtle Blow 2 to the Beastmaster and their pet when both are attacking the same target. The set I use for this build is very similar to my counter build, so you can either incorporate the defenses of that build or opt for more damage output. Pets also help out when looking to suppress enemy TP gain. Fargann's TP drain is great to this end, but Fluffy Bredo is my personal go-to when this is my approach. Recall that Pestilent Plume inflicts a plague effect, a very accurate one, sapping target TP almost as fast as it gains it. If with a monk or puppet master in this scenario, then Shizun's Spiral will cover the plague effect, leaving the Beastmaster free to use Fargann for his TP draining. Tandem Blow taking a Beastmaster to 70% Subtle Blow opens up all sorts of avenues for synergy with other jobs. Monk, Ninja and Dancer excel at suppressing enemy TP gain and controlling battles. Beastmaster now joins their niche and brings debuff support and outright TP erasure if needed. I honestly never thought this would happen to the job, but it's just what updates have done to it. Next we'll go over Beastmaster's core weapon skills. Decimation is a Beastmaster's most exploitable weapon skill. It's a 3-hitting weapon skill with a strength modifier that transfers FTP across its hits, so you'll be using the Focia belt and Gorget with it. Decimation doesn't scale damage with TP and is greatly affected by the Ambuscade Axe, the Dolichainus, which gives it a major damage buff of 120% for each hit in the weapon skill. This means Decimation can be freely spammed as soon as you reach 1000% TP, and odds are it's going to do some hefty damage given how much DPS support Beastmaster comes with. The only things that improve Decimation more than the Dolichainus and the Gletty set are Fighter's Roll and Ifrit's Favour. Decimation being a multi-hit weapon skill responds favourably to multi-attack, so having a solid chance of scoring a double attack on a few hits is very noticeable. You'll occasionally see Decimation spike damage much higher than what it usually hits for. That'd be a multi-attack proc. Calamity is a single hit weapon skill that scales damage very high with TP, quadrupling its FTP between 1 and 3000%. Having two modifiers, Strength and Vitality, Calamity has the highest single damage potential of all axe weapon skills, but it's slightly let down by its poor skill chain properties. Mistral Axe is likewise a single hit weapon skill with FTP that scales even better than Calamity, but at the cost of it only having a strength modifier. If a fencer build was viable, if Beastmaster was not so reliant on dual wielding, then these two weapon skills would become wrecking balls, benefiting greatly from Fencer's TP bonus. Come on Square Enix, give Fencer native drop ability haste. Cloud Splitter is one of Beastmaster's two elemental weapon skills. It's a single hit thunder elemental attack that scales damage with TP. Cloud Splitter needs a very high end set to get decent damage out of it, but nothing improves its potential more than magic defense down debuffs. Zhivago is a brilliant pet to this end. Swooping Frenzy not only inflicts that exact debuff, but also serves as a light skill chain opener, as Cloud Splitter is Fragmentation and Darkness. It's hardly Beastmaster's hardest hitting weapon skill, but it's an alternative. Primal Rend is the second elemental weapon skill. It's similar to Cloud Splitter in terms of damage scaling, but it has a few differences. Primal Rend is light elemental and has a very strange charisma and dexterity modifier, which should make it slightly harder to gear for, but really, its set and Cloud Splitter's set should be the same. With the Aimer Mythic Axe, I can see Primal Rend outdoing Cloud Splitter easily. If I ever get my hands on it, I'll be sure to let you know. Primal Rend has Gravitation as its main skill chain property, making it useful for skill chaining, even starting a potentially lengthy skill chain with Cloud Splitter and Zhivago. Although pet DPS is not optimal as things currently stand, that doesn't mean they're not useful as skill chain partners. The four pets which stand out for this are Vickie, Sefina, Roland and Zhivago. Of these four, 3 incorporate defense down attacks into their skill chains, so odds are they're gonna hurt. You'll notice that all these skill chains are along the light side of the chain. Darkness skill chains with pets do exist, but I cannot personally attest to their effectiveness, as I've not really tried them out. These skill chains have all accounted for ready charge requirements, so as long as you're using the Gletty's breaches and have ready reuse merited, you'll be absolutely fine. Other skill chains you'll probably stumble across while getting used to the job. Go see what you find. The first JSE piece a new Beastmaster must go out of their way to get is the Emprian Body. The Nukumi Gausape's impact on a Beastmaster's DPS cannot be understated. The Gausape puts a Beastmaster's killer trait values to direct and dangerous use. Remember that Beastmaster has access to 7 of these killer traits, all of which are at 10% potency. What the Gausape does is convert half of your total killer trait value to increase your damage dealt and reduce damage that you take when fighting monsters in these ecosystems. Let's break down the math at work here. Base Killer trait alone gives a 5% bonus. The Ankusa Helm gives another 5%, which halves to 2.5%. Killer Instinct tacks on another 15% on top of the damage dealt bonus it already gives by amplifying a killer trait, so that's another 7.5%. That means that altogether you're getting a 15% damage dealt bonus from the Gausape alone. Adding Killer Instinct's 15% bonus on top of it puts it to 30% damage dealt after all of the steps in damage calculation are finished. Suffice to say, 30% damage dealt bonus is not a small number. The Nukumi Gausape isn't the only piece of gear with this effect. Heavy DPS can get a similar effect with the Founder's Breastplate. Founder's has the same effect as the Gausape. It converts half of a player's total killer effect to a damage dealt bonus and a damage taken reduction, which breaks the hard cap on equipment. Let's quickly go over how a Beastmaster impacts heavy DPS in this manner. The math here should be on point, I hope. Beastmasters give a 15% killer trait via Killer Instinct to their party members. Half of this 15% is converted by the Founder's Breastplate to the bonus, so 7%. This 7% is the first damage multiplier value, which is then again multiplied by the 15% from Killer Instinct. 22% is lower than a Beastmaster's 30% because heavy DPS jobs lack those killer traits natively, whereas Beastmaster has them all. So Killer Instinct is enhancing the Beastmaster's traits while merely giving the base trait value to others. There are ways to make up for this deficit though. Equipment and food effects will close the gap to get a similar effect to the Beastmaster's own value. It's still a very strong bonus considering it takes effect after all other damage calculations. It's important to remember that Killer Instinct and killer trait effects gained from Killer Instinct are slightly reduced against NMs, but there are ways to close the gap and undo the penalty. Killer effect bonuses gained from equipment are not subject to the penalty, but those pieces are rare and likely not worth the exchange in any serious DPS setup. There is another way though, a far better way. I'd wager that the majority of players have not seen, let alone used most of the foods here. They're for niche use, but potentially very strong. I just said that what holds back the full potential of the Founder's Breastplate effect on killer traits is that heavy DPS lack the same native killer traits Beastmaster has, and vice versa when a Beastmaster is looking to get the most out of a heavy DPS's circle ability. Both parties have to deal with the NM penalty as well. These foods will resolve that issue instantly, giving heavy DPS an equivalent trait to convert more trait to damage dealt, and a Beastmaster the same. Killer trait potency granted from food effects are not subject to the NM penalty, they're treated the same way as killer effects from equipment. Potentially losing out on more popular foods could be a worthwhile trade when you consider the sheer number of buffs heavy DPS tend to get to their attack and accuracy in endgame content. From what I have personally seen and heard from others attempting it, the amping up of the damage dealt bonus is substantial without loss, provided PDIF cap has been reached. If you wondered why some Dark Knights are using wizard cookies when fighting Embos, now you know why. I sound like a broken record by now, but you can swap a pet you use Killer Instinct out to one of the many that inflict defense down effects to further help DPS out in this regard. If your group is playing to your strengths, you should play to your group's strengths. This connection Beastmaster has to heavy DPS and killer traits is a two-way street. Circle effects from Dragoons, Samurai, Dark Knights and Paladins will also activate the effect of the Nukumi Gausape, since, like Killer Instinct, they also give a base killer trait to all party members. This means that a Beastmaster is an excellent support DPS option for any of those aforementioned jobs, since they'll get great mileage out of the respective circle abilities while bringing more support in the form of their debuffing pets. Beastmaster has easier access to equipment with universal killer plus effects such as the Ankusa Helm and the Arctoid JSE Axe, effectively overcoming the issue of not having those specific killer traits if you decide to not opt for one of the food options. A previous collab guest, Jilk, summarized Beastmaster synergy in groups like this very well, so I'll quote him. Beastmaster's strength has always been in choosing the right pet for the right situation. Whether that was charming pets and understanding the environment, or cooled pets, knowing what traits and abilities to use in what combinations is where you find some really great power. In a party situation, Beastmaster will be in one of the damage dealing roles. The Master has respectable damage, but will almost never be the best DD you can get. So, in order to differentiate, the Beastmaster way to do it is ecosystem synergy. The party dynamics are part of the ecosystem the Beastmaster should adapt to. That really does summarize the job's role in group endgame content. Situational awareness is paramount, as is understanding the other jobs in your group. What is a group lacking or missing entirely? Is there a Geomancer present to handle defense down effects? If there is, are they better suited to using defensive buffs, leaving the Beastmaster open to handle DPS support, so not to leave everyone on the group thin on the ground? Draw from your experience on other jobs, learn from your own experiences as a Beastmaster, and do your best with what you now know. That's all anyone can reasonably ask of you. This brings us to the end of Beastmaster's job guide. Beastmaster is a job far removed from where it was at the level 75 era, to the extent that any old school players who have moved on watching this video on a whim might have not even recognized that much about it. This has been a major undertaking of mine, a good few months in the making, so I hope prospective players who have been curious about the job now have the guide they need to get started. I also hope that the information presented here enlightens the wider player base as to the strengths of the job, and to, well, experiment with it in group setups. I honestly meant to have this guide out a lot sooner, but held off on the premise that the job was going to get patched again, as the developers said it would be. If and when that day comes, I will have to publish a second part, especially if pets are made viable DPS through any changes to the job. Going forward, I want to take a few months off from doing job guides, returning to my lighter, shorter videos on other topics. I'm also, well, kind of out of jobs to cover. I'm considering returning to my earliest job guides and remaking them. Some are woefully out of date, and I have a far better recording and editing setup now. I'll ask closer to the time which one needs updating first, putting it to a community vote. Righto, I'm signing off. Thanks for sticking with this very long job guide. I'll see you all next time.